Okay. I think I can see out there pretty well. Yeah, how many of you are programmers? I mean, you write automation? Same thing, right? And that looks like a lot of, what are the rest of you? Managers of some kind? Never mind. So, the Earth at the moment is in an ice age. And the definition of an ice age is when there is ice anywhere on the planet. So we have polar caps right now, both on the south and on the north. That means we're in an ice age. The Earth is usually not in an ice age. It's usually much warmer. There's no ice at all. So why are we in this one at the moment? And it turns out that that's a story that's 50 million years old. And it has to do with the continent of India smashing into Asia and raising the Himalayas. And then the weathering of the Himalayas pulls carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, which cools things down a fair bit. And then it also has to do with Antarctica sliding over the South Pole 14 million years ago so that snow can accumulate and ice can accumulate. That cools the planet off a little bit. And then it also has to do with the Isthmus of Panama closing. Because prior to that, there was a warm water connection of water between the Pacific and the Atlantic, but it closed 2.5 million years ago, which blocked off from the north to the south the connection of water between the Atlantic and the Pacific. And then, with all of that going on, the orbit of the Earth changes its shape over a period of about 100,000 years. And it'll get elongated, and then it'll get circular and elongated and circular. And when it's elongated, the Earth gets less sunlight, and it gets more when it's circular. So every 100,000 years now, we get a lot of ice. And then it goes away, and then it comes back, and then it goes away. There have been 15 glaciations over the last 2.5 million years. And they last about 100,000 years, and then there's a warm period that lasts about 10,000. That's happened 15 times. We are in the warm period after the last glaciation, which ended about 12,000 years ago. So we can expect it to get cold soon. In any case, that's not why we're here. We are here because I'm going to do a talk, and I've done this talk many, many times in many, many places. It's called Expecting Professionalism. And I'm going to start this out by suggesting that I will be your new CTO. I'm going to transport you to a fantasy land in which I am your new CTO. You do not want to live in this fantasy land because I would be a terrible CTO. I'm not a manager, I'm a programmer. But if I were your new CTO, I would have certain expectations. Now, I'm going to tell you these expectations one at a time. I'll just walk you through them. They're very simple. But I want you to listen to them very carefully because you have two ears. One of those ears, the ear of the programmer, the ear of the automator, the ear of the technologist, is going to listen to them one way. The other ear is going to be the ear of the customer, the ear of the manager, the ear of the client. They will listen to them another way. The client ear, the customer ear, will hear these expectations and they will make perfect sense. The technologist's ear, the programmer's ear, the automator's ear is going to listen to them and think they're absolutely insane. And you, I expect, will figure out the difference. Why this? Professionalism. Are we professionals? Do we have a profession? If we have a profession, tell me please, what is it that we profess? Do we have any standards? Do we have any ethics? Do we have any disciplines? What do we profess that would make us professionals? And the answer to that is, well, I'll leave it to you to answer it. I know what my answer is. We hardly have anything of that kind. We hardly have any kind of standards written down, understood. We have very few disciplines that we all agree upon. And ethics? Have we even begun to state that? Now, why is that important? Our industry is 7 decades old, maybe 8, depending on when you start counting. Electronic computers were not in existence until the very late 1940s. They weren't practical until the mid-1950s. And now, well, I mean, how many computers are in this room? How many computers are in your pockets or on your wrist? How much software is executing in this room at the moment? And now forget about all the computers that you own. Look at the room. Look at the walls. How much software is running in the walls of this room? I see a funny sign over there. I think it's an exit sign. Is there software running in that exit sign? Probably there is, because there's probably a battery there. And if there's a battery there, it's probably getting trickle charged. And if it's getting trickle charged, there's probably a little digital signal processor running some code written in C by some 22-year-old at 3 in the morning. There's speakers up there. There's software running in those speakers? Yeah, because nowadays it is cheaper to get a little digital signal processor to use fast Fourier transforms to filter out the 60-cycle hum than it is to put an inductor and capacitor in there. It's just cheaper to do it digitally. Now, go out there, out into the hotel, right? There's elevators, software in those elevators. And are you at home? Do you have a microwave oven? Software in that. Dishwasher? Software in that. Refrigerator? Software in that. Telephone? Does anybody have a telephone anymore? Right? Software in that. Television sets? Does anybody remember when there was not software in a television set? Right? Remember you turn it off and this picture would just shrink and there'd be a little dot on the screen? Some of you remember that. Most of you don't, probably. How about your car? How much software is in a modern car? The answer to that is about 100 million lines of code. And that's not a Tesla. That's just a dumbass car. Right? Most of that code is sitting in the entertainment system and the GPS system. But some of that code sits between your foot and the brake calipers. Wouldn't you like to know what that code says? There are if statements sitting in between your foot and the brakes. How is that code tested? How did they test it? What kind of tests did they run? Or maybe a better question is, how many people have been killed because the if statements that sit between their foot and the brake failed to function? And the answer to that is dozens of people have been killed. Many dozens of people have been killed in a terrifying moment when their car goes out of control, they can't stop it, and they hit a bridge. And far more people have been injured. We, the people who make the computers work, are killing people. Most of us did not get into this business to kill people. I know how I got into this business. I got into this business because I found a computer one day and I wrote an infinite loop and printed my name in an infinite loop, and I thought, my God, that's great. The power. Most of us had an experience like that, or some kind of transformation where we decided, this is kind of cool, making these machines do whatever we want. And now we're killing people. And we should think about that. Think about the 737 MAX. I don't know how many hundreds of people were killed in that. And that was a partial hardware problem, but there was a big software component to that problem. And that software component, along with the hardware, caused 2 airplanes to slam into the ground at the speed of sound. That's not a good outcome. Or maybe you know about the story of Knight Capital. Knight Capital, wonderful little trading company in New York. And a couple of software guys did some dumb thing. It's the kind of thing that anybody would do, just stupid. They didn't upload every bit of software to one of the servers, forgot one of the servers. And it cost the company $450 million over a period of 45 minutes. And the company went under, right? And the CEO woke up in the morning. He didn't have a company anymore. The vultures had already bought it out from underneath him. That's another one of those sad stories. Or we could talk about Obamacare. Does anybody remember when Obamacare started, the Affordable Care Act? Now, never mind the politics. The politics is irrelevant. The law that was passed by Congress and signed into law by the President of the United States said that there had to be a software system up and running on October 1st, 2013. The dumbest thing you can ever do is say that a software system must be up and running on a date certain, because it will not be up and running on that date certain. But someone might turn it on. And that's exactly what happened with the Affordable Care Act. Somebody turned it on. And I can imagine all the developers of that system, hiding under their desks on October 1st going, oh my God, they turned it on. It was so bad, I don't know if you remember how bad it was, but for a period of about 3 months, the system was completely unusable. And the political factions in the United States, which were very divided at the time, not like today where it's all just, everybody loves each other. The political factions at the time nearly undid the law. A software failure nearly undid a major domestic policy. That's the kind of stuff we are playing with now. And what's going to happen, and I don't know when, but it'll probably soon, is some software person is going to do some dumb thing and kill 10,000 people at a shot. And it's not very hard to figure out what that might be. I mean, you could imagine now what that might be. And when that happens, and it's going to happen at some point, when that happens, the politicians of the world will rise up in righteous indignation, as they should, and they will point their fingers right at us, the people who are automating everything, and they will ask us the question, how could you have let this happen? And we'd better have an answer for them. Because if our answer is, yeah, well, my boss told me it had to be done on Tuesday. If that's the answer that we give the politicians of the world, then they will hang their heads in disgust, and they will walk away, and they will begin to pass laws. Laws that you and I are not going to like very much. Laws about how we do our jobs, and what educations we have to get, and what processes we have to follow, what signatures we have to get. And we'll all wind up working for the post office, which I really would like to avoid. And therefore, I'd like you to consider the call for professionalism. That's what these expectations that I'm about to read to you are. So, without further ado, the first of my expectations, which is a simple one, it's easy to understand, but I want you to hear with the two ears. The one ear will say yes, the other ear will say no. I expect that we will not ship shit. Listen to those two ears. Because the one is saying, well, yeah, we shouldn't be shipping shit. And the other ear is saying, I have no idea how I'm not going to ship shit. Fundamental basic idea. Maybe it would be a good idea if we actually did a good job. Wouldn't it be nice if we'd thought through all the things we're about to do and we didn't delete half of the rows in the database? Wouldn't that be a nice idea? Wouldn't it be good if we figured out how we're not going to screw up? Now, a lot of the rest of these expectations have to do with that. But I want you to give some thought to that. How are you going to not screw up? Why do we screw up? Why is software so hard? The experts in software have said, these are guys that go back, 50 years. Edgar Dijkstra, I don't know if you've ever heard that name, but he's one of the classic original software guys, right, from the 1950s and 60s. And he said at the time, software is probably the most complicated thing that humankind has ever tried. Now, we've gone to the moon, That was fairly complicated. We won World War II. That was fairly complicated. We have engaged in a number of extremely difficult projects, and yet it may be that software is the hardest thing, the most complicated thing that human beings have ever attempted. And I want you to think about that one very carefully. Think about the 100 million lines in your car. 100 million lines of code running in your car. How many lines of code are running in the world? 30 years ago, there was software running, but it didn't run everything. Today, software runs everything. Nothing happens in our society without software being right smack in the middle of every bit of it. You can't cook a hot dog without software. You can't make a phone call. You can't watch television. You can't drive to the store. You can't buy anything. You can't sell anything. No law can be enforced. No law can be passed. No insurance claim can be filed without software sitting right smack in the middle of it all. If you've got a phone, that phone is doing all kinds of stuff for you right now. You may have a sleep monitor. Anybody do one of those dumb sleep monitors? You put it on your phone, it shows you your sleep at night. How much of your life is governed by some code that people have written? And it's everywhere. Software is everywhere. It is the foundation of our civilization. If all the software in the world stopped right now, civilization would be over. We could not recover from that. Well, I mean, there'd be a lot of deaths, let's put it that way, and then eventually some people would scrabble together some abacuses and make things work again. But civilization would not tolerate the loss of software. You and I, the people who automate things, we rule the world. Other people think they rule the world, and then they hand the rules to us, and we write the rules that execute in the machines that govern everything. And because we rule the world, I think we should start talking to them about the taxes we pay. I expect that we will always be ready. Always be ready to what? Always be ready to deploy, always be ready to ship, always be ready to execute. And I want to be very careful about how I say this, because I don't mean that you have to be ready every minute of the day. What I do mean is that when you are creating software, when you are creating automations, when you are creating programs, you do it in a rhythm that is predictable. You work through and say, I'm going to work in a rhythm of, say, once a week. Once a week is a good rhythm. Every Friday, I'm going to be able to say that I am done with something. Now, how much are you done with? Doesn't really matter, as long as you are done with something. As long as you can say, okay, this is Friday, and on this Friday, I can deploy something, and I am so confident in what I am deploying that I am ready to turn it over. If you can be ready on that kind of a schedule to deploy something, then people can begin to count on that. They can count on the fact that, oh, they're deploying on Friday. Maybe even on the following Monday, they could give you a few items that you could think about. And then maybe you could get some of them done by the following Friday. It would be an interesting way for you to schedule your time and their time so that you can operate in a rhythm that everyone can predict. The worst thing that software people do that violates this rule is say, I have no idea when this is going to be done. It could be 2 weeks, it could be 2 years, I just don't know. That is not an acceptable outcome. You have to be able to establish some kind of measured productivity so that everybody around you can rely on the fact that, oh, it's Friday, they're going to be delivering something today. If you deliver more than that, if you deliver more frequently, maybe you should shorten that time period. But a nice time period would be a good thing to have. I expect stable productivity. Stable productivity. Let me define that for you by defining what unstable productivity is. You may, from time to time, have gotten involved with a project. And the project's a big project. Got a lot of stuff going on inside it. And early on, you could make progress very quickly because there wasn't a lot of stuff around there. There wasn't a lot of code. There wasn't a lot of automation. It was pretty clean slate. So you can make progress very quickly in those early times. But then as the complexity grows, you tend to slow down. Everybody tends to slow down. It gets harder and harder to see how things fit together. You don't know if this piece is going to work well with that piece, so you have to study it a lot more. If you connect these two pieces together, you're not quite sure what the repercussions are going to be, and you can get scared about that and not want to go fast. Stable productivity is the opposite of that. Stable productivity says that if you're on a project, and you start that project on a day, and you make a certain amount of productivity, then come back a month later, and you should be making the same amount of productivity. You should be going just as fast. Come back in a year, you should be going just as fast. We don't want to build systems that are so complicated that we slow down as those systems get bigger and bigger and bigger. This is a huge problem. Most software people in the world suffer from this problem. They start with a small system, the system grows and grows over time, and they begin to not be able to understand the system anymore. And they start to slow down and become paranoid. They don't want to make changes because they don't know what the changes are going to do to them. And so they will lose productivity over time. I don't expect that. I expect stable productivity. How are you going to achieve stable productivity? Well, you can't build the complex systems that scare you. Somehow or another, you're going to have to build systems. They may be complex, but they need to be so well organized that you can still make progress inside them, and they cannot scare you. The idea of digging into a system should not frighten you. You should be able to look at the system as though you were its creator, because you are, and treat it as though you are its creator, and keep control of it. I expect inexpensive adaptability. I expect that when the client calls and says, I need this change, it should be a simple change. I expect you to say, yeah, okay, well, maybe it's not as simple as you thought, but we'll get right on that. How expensive should that be? The customer thinks it's a simple change. You look at it and say, nope, that's not simple at all. That just violates all the assumptions I've been making for the last year. Which means, of course, that you've been making the wrong assumptions for the last year. Which happens, of course. So I expect that we're going to find a way so that the cost of change is proportional to the customer's expectation. When we give the customer the price for a change, the customer goes, yeah, that's about what I thought. Rather than the current situation in many cases, which is customer comes along and says, just a little thing, can you do it? And we say, yeah, it's $100,000. What? Why does it cost that much? Well, you see, a year ago, we made this interesting assumption about the structure of the data, and now we're just going to have to rip that to shreds. Don't want to see that. Inexpensive adaptability, or at least proportional adaptability. I expect continuous improvement. Everything should get better. Continuous improvement. The structure of the systems should get better. The structure of the code should get better. All the automation should be getting better. Everything should be getting better with time. That's what humans do. Humans make things better with time. I know, contrary to popular opinion, but humans make things better with time. It is not good if we make things worse. And the typical thing with software people is they make things worse. They throw one big kludge on top of another big kludge on top of another big kludge, and they make this massive kludge that no one can figure anything out. And then what happens? got a big, horrible mess of kludges, and somebody finally comes along one day and says, we should throw this all out and rewrite it all. That's always a bad solution, by the way. Don't do that. I expect fearless competence. Fearless competence. Now, the opposite of that is fearful incompetence. So what is fearful incompetence? You go to your workstation, you bring up some things to work on. Somebody else wrote them. Somebody else did them. You scroll around on there, and the blood drains from your face, and you stare at it in slack-jawed horror. And you know you're going to have to touch it. And a little angel pops up on your right shoulder and whispers in your ear and says, you could clean this a little bit. And the devil pops up on your left shoulder and screams in your left ear and says, no, because if you touch it, you will break it. And if you break it, it will become yours forever. And then you back away. I'm not going to be the one to do that, man. I don't want to own this thing. That is fear. That is the fear of change. And I want you to think carefully about that, how wildly unprofessional it is, how irresponsible it is to be afraid of the very thing you created, to have let it get so far out of your control that you now fear to do the one thing that might make it last. And that would be to clean it, to straighten it out, to reorganize it, to make it better. But now you fear it. And so you let it go. This is the reason that systems degrade. Systems don't degrade naturally. There is no natural degradation of systems. There's not some kind of biological agent that goes in there and ruins them, except, of course, for the humans. We are the biological agents that go into the systems and ruin them. And we do so because we fear them. We don't clean them, we don't keep them organized because we're afraid to do too much. How do we fix that? How can we alleviate the fear? How can we lessen the fear? I presume you test things. Maybe you should be thinking about a different level of testing things. I wonder if you have automations that test other automations. That's something to think about, isn't it? In any case, I expect extreme quality. I don't expect messes. I don't expect slash-dab stuff. I don't expect you to kind of throw something together and hope that it works. I expect extreme quality. Quality that is so high that you're never dumping on QA. Now, I don't know if you guys have QA departments. Some of you might, some of you might not. But the position underneath that sphincter muscle is where QA stands, waiting for the load to be delivered. If you have a project, QA is going to check that project for you. It should be due on a date. Does it arrive on the date? Does that load get delivered on the right date? No, because everybody's slower than that. But can the delivery date be changed? The answer to that is no, because we promised the customer. And so QA, if you have QA, winds up at the back end of that project, and they have the least amount of time. They're under the most pressure. Everybody else is eaten into their time. And they've got to somehow deliver quality in that environment. That's completely backwards. QA does not belong at the end of the project. QA belongs at the front end of the project, specifying behavior, not validating behavior. I expect that if you have QA, they will find nothing. That should be what happens to QA. They should find nothing. The people who check the work should find nothing because you have already checked the work and found nothing. QA should not be finding anything. In fact, QA should wonder why they have a job. Where did QA come from? Why are there QA departments for software teams? Why would a company invest money in a whole different department? And the answer to that is obvious, because the first department screwed up so much that they had to have another department to clean up the mess of the first department. QA is there, unfortunately, because we who write the code did not do a very good job of it. We would ship shit. QA. If you have a QA department, how do you know they're doing a good job? How do you measure the effectiveness of a tester? Someone who tests your systems. Well, the good ones are probably finding bugs. In fact, the more bugs they find, probably the better they are. So now we have a positive value for a defect. There's a group of people who now have a positive value for defects. They want to see more defects, because the more defects they find, the better they are. They can get raises that way. Who else in the organization considers defects to be a positive? Well, there's an old saying in software. I can meet any schedule you set for me if the software doesn't have to work. Name your date, and I'll get it on that date, as long as it doesn't have to work. Now, that little thought process, coupled to the fact that QA likes defects, means that an economy can get set up between the development side and the QA side. Not a word has to be spoken, but both sides understand that it is in their benefit to have defects. This is probably one of the worst diseases that can assault a software organization. I expect automation. I expect automation of tests. The picture you see there is the manager of QA. Hands are the QA manager. It's a big system that he has to test. The document that he's holding out is the table of contents for his manual test plan. It is not the manual test plan itself, it is just the table of contents. He has 80,000 manual tests that he must run every 6 months, and he farms that out to an army of testers in India, and it costs him $1 million. The picture was taken in 2008. The financial crisis had begun. His manager had called him into his office and cut his budget by 50%. He's holding this out to me, asking me which half of these tests he should not run. And I told him, well, you can cut the document, straightways, crossways, or depthwise. You're not going to know if half your system works. This is what happens whenever you have manual tests. Manual tests will force you to throw away your tests. As the body of tests grows, the cost of running those tests becomes unsustainable, and you will throw them out. Tests need to be automated. Tests that test your automations need to be automations themselves. Automate the testing of your automations. Write programs that test the behavior of programs. Anybody study accounting? Got any accountants or burgeoning accountants in here? Anybody hear of a discipline called double entry bookkeeping? Programmers, what do we do? What do we do, we people who automate things? We create documents. That's what we do. We create documents. But they're bizarre documents. They're strange. Normal people would look at them and go, what the hell's that? Because they've got weird squiggles on them and funny lines on them and funny symbols on them, and they go for page after page. And normal people can't read them at all. We can read them. They can't. And then every symbol has to be correct. Everything we put on those documents has to be correct. And if it's not correct, terrible things happen. Now, who has that problem? We programmers do, we automators do. We have that problem. But there's another group of people who have that problem, and those are the accountants. Accountants create documents that no one else understands, right? Nobody looks at the books that deeply. They don't know what all those numbers mean and all those odd symbols and why it's arranged this way and why it's arranged that way. And if any of the symbols are incorrect, terrible things happen. Company can go out of business. The executives can get sent to jail. We've seen it happen. How do they prevent that? They use a discipline. There's that word, discipline, one of those professional words, discipline. They have a discipline. It's called double entry bookkeeping. Accountants enter everything twice. The transactions go once on the asset side, once on the liability side. I know there's equities, never mind that. Asset, liability. And they follow separate mathematical pathways until there's a subtraction on the balance sheet that must yield a zero. And they are taught early on. Enter your transactions one at a time. Boys and girls, young accountants, enter your transactions one at a time. Asset, liability, sum them up, subtract, get a zero. Asset, liability, sum them up, zero. Asset, liability, sum them up, zeroed. Because what you don't want to do is take 1,000 transactions and put them all in the assets and take those same 1,000 and put them all in the liabilities, subtract and get a 37. Because you don't know where that 37 came from, so you do them one at a time. And we in the software world have begun to adopt the same discipline. We will write a little tiny test. We will write a little bit of code. We will execute and make sure that they agree. And then a little bit more test and a little bit more code and execute and agree. And we will have something that tests what we are automating. And the two will grow one little bit at a time. Skip that one. I expect that we will cover for each other. Now, how many times have you said that you work in a team? How many times have you heard you work in a team? Right? Well, we've got a team of people over here and they're doing this, or a team of people over there and they're doing that. How do you define a team? What are the characteristics of a team? Imagine that we go use a sports metaphor, and we've got, well, call it soccer or European football or whatever. And you've got a team that is trying to move the ball down the field against their opponents. Right? Okay. Bouncing it back, passing the ball back and forth, trying to get it down the field. One of the team members goes down, trips, falls, something like that. What do the other members of that team do? They keep the ball going down the field. They cover the hole, and they keep the ball going down the field. Maybe a better metaphor is a ship metaphor. On board ship, Navy, you've got a job, but you know how to do someone else's job too, for obvious reasons, because people go down aboard ship. I expect that we will cover for each other. If one of us goes down, someone else can step in, which means that we have to be relatively familiar with each other's work. If you're doing some interesting project, and you're doing it alone, and you go down, there's nobody to cover for you. There's no way that the company is going to benefit from your work because you went down. Now, maybe you're only down for a week, but still, that's a week of lost time. You got sick, you got COVID, you something, who knows what, and you just couldn't do it for a week. And the company loses that, the business loses that. Well, maybe the business doesn't want to lose that. Wouldn't it be nice if other people could step in and cover for you, or if you could step in and cover for them? And so it might be advisable to spend some time working with others on what they are doing and inviting others to work with you on what you are doing a few minutes every day. It doesn't have to be a lot. So that if there's trouble, and it's important, you can cover for each other. And that is how a team behaves. I expect honest estimates. Okay, now, what is the most honest estimate you can give? 3 little words. I don't know. That's right. The most honest estimate you can give is that you don't know, because you don't know. But it's not as simple as that. Because although it's accurate to say that you don't know, it's not precise. And what we need is a little bit more precision than that. So when you say you don't know, you also need to define the shape of what you don't know. So here's an example of that. If you take a project that you're working on, you break it down into tasks. Then you estimate each task, and everybody's done this before. Okay, this task is going to take me a day, that task, it's going to be 2 days, that's going to be 5 days. Don't do that. For each task, come up with 3 numbers. The best case, the worst case, and the nominal case. The best case is the case where all your coworkers are polite for the entire time. The phone never rings. There's no meetings. You never get into a fight with your significant other. Life is good. And that's when you can use the best case. The worst case is things are really bad, almost to the point of nuclear war. And then the nominal case is what you think, the odds are 50-50. Those are the numbers that you should give to the people who are expecting estimates. Someone says, okay, I need this done by Tuesday. And you say, well, I might be able to get it done by Tuesday, but I don't think so. It's probably going to be a lot longer than that. And give them 3 numbers. Now, they don't want those 3 numbers. They'd rather have 1 number. And they'd rather have the number that they gave you. But that's a lie. If you go to them and you say, well, yes, I'll go ahead and I'll do it with the number that you gave to me, that's a lie. You're telling them a lie because you don't know you can do that number. You don't know you can deliver by that date. You need to look at it seriously and give them the 3 numbers. All right, if everything goes well, I can get it in by Tuesday. If things go the way they usually do, it's going to be next Tuesday. And if all hell breaks loose, it's going to be 3 Tuesdays away. Now, that's fair. That is the right answer. They're not going to like it, but that's their problem, not yours. You have to be honest, and that is an honest estimate. And then there's nothing at all wrong with changing the estimate the next day because you've learned a few things. I figured out a few things, I'm going to have to change the estimate. Sometimes you grow it, sometimes you shrink it. Anybody here have managers that demand things on certain dates? And then you'll say, well, I'm not sure, I don't know. Maybe I can, maybe I can't. And then the manager will do this thing. Will you at least try? Now, that's a trick question, right? Because the answer to that question is no. How dare you accuse me of not trying? I am already trying. You probably don't want to do it in that voice, but that's what your brain should be going, right there. Your brain should be saying, how dare that son of a accuse me of not trying? We are all trying. We are trying. We're doing the best we can. The answer is we are already trying. Thank you very much. I expect that when the answer is no, you will say no. If there can be a definition of a professional without listing all the things they profess, a professional is the person who knows when to say no. The most valuable thing they can do is stop the company from going down a pathway that's destructive. And you have to look at yourself now and realize that you are the ones who know. The people wanting things don't know. They have desires, they have goals, they're perfectly reasonable, but they don't know. You are the ones who know. Now, I don't think you should run around going, no, 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 all the time. On the other hand, when the answer is no, you have to be able to stand there and say no. Can't do that. We need a different kind of solution, but that one's not going to work. I expect you will be able to say no. This is the last one. Continuous aggressive learning. I expect that we all keep learning. This field that we are in is a field of constant change. And you've all experienced the crazy change that we've gone through over the last decade, and it's probably going to continue this kind of change for a while to come. And the only way to stay even with it, let alone not getting ahead of it. The only way to stay even with it is to read, study, learn. I often tell people that if they want to be a professional in this business, you work 40 hours for your employer, that's fine. You better go home and spend another 8 in a week just trying to stay ahead of what's going on here. And yeah, I know everybody's got a family life and everybody's got a home life, and I don't want work to absorb too much. On the other hand, it's your livelihood, it's your career, and if you don't put the effort into it, nobody's going to do that for you. So it'd be wise to take a little time, set it aside on a weekend or on an evening, and do a little extra study. If you go to a doctor and you've got a serious illness, you kind of hope that doctor goes home at night and reads journals and studies. You don't want to go to the doctor who puts in a 40-hour week. Done my 40. That's not the kind of doctor you want to go to. And that's not the kind of technical person you want to have working with you either. Oh, I do have one more. And I've got time for one more. One of the problems we have in our industry is, well, let me put it differently. How many programmers are there in the world? You ever thought about that one? How many programmers in the world? People writing code for some reason or another. How many? And I think the answer is 100 million. Depends on who you count, but I think it's on the order of 100 million. In 1948, there was one. The first person to write code on a machine that executed. That was in 1948. So between now and 1948, how many years is that? 62 plus 24 is 80. Did I do that right? 76? 76. Okay, maybe it's 76. 76 years. It's been 76 years from one programmer to 100 million. What kind of curve is that? Is that a linear curve? Or is it an exponential curve? Must be exponential, because otherwise, it'd be a straight line. It's definitely not. It's some kind of exponential. And okay, if it's an exponential curve, let's use the exponent of the base 2. We're programmers, we're going to use base 2. That means that there's a power of 2 that approaches 100 million. All right, what power of 2 is that? Well, 2 to the 10th is 1,000. 2 to the 20th is 1,000,000. 2 to the 7th is about 100, 128. So 2 to the 27th. 2 to the 27th is 100 million. So that means that the number of programmers has doubled 27 times in the last 76 years. Last 70 some odd years. Now do that division. How many doublings have there been? There's been 27 doublings in 72 years. So that means every 2 years-ish, the number of programmers in the world doubles. Now I think that's aggressive. I think the number is actually more like once every 5 years. But the number of people involved with software doubles every 5 years. And that means that half the programmers in the world have less than 5 years experience. And this will always be true. As long as we're doubling at that rate, it will always be true that half of us will have less than 5 years experience, which puts us in a state of perpetual inexperience. We do not have enough people with more than 5 years to train the people who have less than 5 years. And so there's this constant loss of information. All the old guys, have you ever noticed that all programmers are young? You ever seen that? They're all in their 20s or 30s. Whatever happened to the old guys? Well, all the old guys are still here. There just weren't a lot of us back in those days. So we need to train each other. And that's what this last one is. I expect mentoring. If you've got over 5 years experience, find somebody with less experience and help them along. Work with them, train them, Give them the benefit of your wisdom. If you have less than 10 years experience, find somebody with 15 and draw from the benefit of their experience. Because believe me, there is a lot of experience to be drawn from. This is not the kind of thing that you can pick up in 2 weeks and master. Getting software right, as it turns out, is pretty hard. And with that, I think I will terminate this talk. Time for Q&A. We have about 10 minutes.
Before we get to Q&A, round of applause.
Thank you.
As usual, I've got like 20 questions in my head, but I don't want to steal time. Any questions in the audience? All right, I'll kick it off. Quality of code. In your journey, are there examples of where certain companies have vastly improved the quality of their code and you feel great about the state of the industry? Or are we at this perpetual, always struggling to improve the quality of code?
It's not so much that I see companies that improve the quality of their code, although there have been a few cases. But what's much more common is that frustrated people will leave one company and form another, and the new company sets a new standard. And then their code is much better. Their disciplines are better. They start to develop disciplines and ethics. So we're in a very interesting state right now where people are migrating towards the companies that have their values. If you're in a company that doesn't have your values, it's an unstable situation. You're going to have to leave at some point. And that happens very frequently nowadays. And there's this very interesting division that's happening with disciplines. Which discipline should we have? Which standard should we have? And that's causing an interesting separation of the population, shall I say.
Gotcha. Okay, one follow-up, and then we're going to jump to a question here. The follow-up is, you talked about, I'm not going to call it a doomsday scenario, but you did say, like, hey, there's going to be an event that knocks out 10,000 people, kills them.
Yeah.
Right? And I want to frame that with, you've got automation, and you've got AI, generative AI, et cetera, right? And there's concern about what AI may eventually do to us. And then proactively, allegedly, a look at, maybe we'll set up all these regulations of AI to protect us. Sounds good, but the people calling for the regulations are the entrenched giants who have all the money to build AI and keep everyone else out of building AI. What do you make of all this in terms of what the true dangers are and what we should do about it?
I think the people that are predicting doom are just in it for clickbait. They like the idea of predicting doom. It's going to be terrible. Oh my God, life is going to end. No, it's not. There's another group of people that are saying there will be no more programmers because the AIs will do all the programming. Let me tell you a little story about that. The very first programmers to worry that they were going to lose their jobs because of a technology improvement were programmers in the very early 1950s. These people were writing in binary, literally binary. They wrote their code in binary. There were no compilers. There were no assemblers. In the worst case, they actually got pieces of paper tape and they punched holes in the paper tape one at a time. They were the programmers. They wrote code. They called it coding because the holes in the paper was the code. And Grace Hopper came along and came up with an idea for taking a much, it wasn't much, a slightly better representation, still numbers, not quite binary anymore, but still numbers, and automatically using the computer to automatically translate that to the holes in the paper tape. And the programmers at the time said, oh my God, anybody will be able to do this, then we're going to lose our jobs. This is what AI is. AI is another tool. It's a fairly useful tool as long as you don't believe too much of what they say. ChatGPT is perfectly willing to lie to you and tell you all kinds of misinformation. All of them will. If you ask them to write code, they might write some code for you, but you better check that code really well because those things have no idea what they're doing. They're not thinking. Right? They are still just programs that are assembling data statistically to satisfy an algorithm. They are not judgment. They have no judgment. As time goes by, I think these programs will get better and better. AIs will get better and better. That's good. They will not approach human intelligence. That is not on the horizon. I know people say, well, we're only a year away from AGI. Yes, we are. We are well more than a year away. I doubt that the current silicon-based technology has the capacity to emulate a human brain. I'm not sure that's feasible. You know, we put down our circuits on two-dimensional things. We have not broken into the three-dimensional neural net that you have in your head. We're way away from that kind of stuff. So I don't think that's going to be an issue. There will be some changes. There will be some interesting things that happen. There will be great tools that will help us, but the human will always be in the loop. My prediction.
Okay, thank you. Got a question over here?
Thanks for the great talk. It was really insightful. It really hits home, especially because I suspect a lot of people in the room who are basically beginning their automation journey and therefore beginning their journey into software development may find themselves shipping shit, not being ready, basically bumping into a lot of these classic mistakes that you were talking about. Are there any best practices or specific process methodologies that you can share with us to help avoid that in your experience?
Sure, there's a ton of them. It's all politicized, of course. It would be a good idea to look into the agile technologies, the agile methodologies. There are a number of good ones. There's also some bad ones, but if you read with a little bit of judgment, you can work through that. The agile methods will help you organize the time you spend in a week, the way you talk to managers, the way you estimate. Those are fairly nice, simple approaches. From a technology point of view, it would be wise to investigate testing methodologies. There are a number of those out there as well. I could recommend looking up the words test-driven development. And just read what you can of that and try to make sense of it. It's a very interesting kind of discipline that will eventually help everybody, I think, produce much, much better code. The most important thing about this, though, is look beyond yourself. Look out, read what's on the net, read what's printed in books, learn, because there are people who have been doing this for a very long time, who are trying, to the best of their ability, to communicate their wisdom, such as it is, back to everybody else. It's very easy to look at the way software is structured and think, oh, this is easy. Anybody can do this. It's just if statements, loops. No, it's not. There's much, much more to learn about it.
Additional questions? Okay, we have one here and one here, and then we'll see where we are on time there.
Okay.
I know we're actually at time or a little over, but that's okay because we can steal from my time. Your time is the time. We'll go here and then over there. Where was the question over here?
One here.
Oh, yeah. We'll go right here, and then we'll jump across the room right over to there. Go ahead.
Cool. Thanks, Uncle Bob, for your talk. I'm here at Roost. I'm the one who is responsible for taking a lot of your teachings and distilling it down to the people who automate. And one trend that I often see is because coding is now low code, where we're typing less and less, and a lot is abstracted out in drag and drop, the technical barrier has lessened, but there's still a lot of technical aspects that we still need to know. So my question is, how do we bridge that gap where the technical barrier is lowered, but the learning curve can be much steeper because of that?
So I'm going to disagree with you. I don't think the technical barrier has lessened. I'm going to get out of these lights because they're making me crazy. I don't think the technical barrier has lessened at all. What the tools give you is a lot of power at the bottom. There's a lot of capability down there. But what you are creating is exactly what any programmer creates. If statements, loops, logic, interconnected logic. I got to get this, I got to do that with it, I got to put it over here, I got to get this thing, I've got to add it to that thing and do this with it, and if that's negative, I've got to do this. That's all it is. That's all software ever has been. Even when they were doing it in binary and paper tape, that's all it ever was. But it is a vastly deeper topic than that. After a while, you learn the principles of organizing those statements, organizing the if statements, organizing the while loops, organizing them with certain data sets. You start to see the parallels between the shape of data and the shape of control. There's an immense amount to learn. You guys are not doing anything easier than any of the rest of us. You just have a thin layer on top of a vast bottom layer. But as time goes by, do you see that list that I can't remember his name, but the unicorn guy, right? Did you see that list of all the different automations? He's got an immense body of code there. That's what we're all facing. None of this stuff is going to get smaller. None of the things you are doing are going to get less. You're going to think about other things you can do and how you can take the one thing you did and build upon it to do the next thing. So this one over here is going to make use of that one, and then this one over here is going to make use of that one, and you will build the same castles in the sky as everybody else who has ever programmed, because it's all the same thing. I'm sorry. That was you, right? Okay, good. Did that answer your question? Okay.
Question over here.
Yeah, hey, Kelly from Courser. You guys, you skipped one that tickled a very special part of my brain over here on nothing fragile. So we are, growing immensely quickly and trying to build an organization that scales, and then doing that quickly equals there's some fragility occasionally. What did that mean? Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, the one that I didn't talk about. I expect nothing fragile. Fragile systems are systems that are ill-conceived. They have not been fully thought through. They handle 80% of the normal cases, but when the abnormal cases come, the 20% that are abnormal, they either do the wrong thing or just bail out. And what happens is the fragile areas tend to group together. So if you look at the body of the code, the fragile stuff, the stuff that does things wrong, tends to accumulate in one part of the system, and the other systems stay relatively clean. The other parts of the system stay relatively clean. I don't know exactly why this happens, but there is this tropism for code to gather where it's doing the worst. So because of that, I say I expect nothing fragile, because I don't want any of those chunks of code in there that can gather more and more bad code to them. Why does it happen? I have a theory about why that happens. When there is a big chunk of code that you don't understand real well, it tends to become the dumping ground for everything else you don't understand really well. So then you say, well, I got this thing I got to do. I'm not quite sure where to put it. I'll put it in with those things. And the rules in that thing are a little different because somebody originally broke some rules, and so you feel a little safer in that one little area that you can break some rules to and kind of do a half-ass job. So that's really where that came from. I expect that every part of the code is as clean as every other part of the code. There are no nuclei of fragile code. I think that's probably the best way to explain that.
Are there additional questions? There are additional questions. Let me do a time check and let you know how we're doing. We'll get to your questions. And Uncle Bob, is it okay if we keep you for a few more minutes?
Another 5. I got a taxi coming in about 15.
15. So, okay, a couple more minutes? Is
Yeah,
that
that's
okay?
fine.
Okay, great. We were supposed to break at 5:15. We're still going to do that. I was going to do a 15-minute wrap-up. Instead, I'm going to do a 2-minute wrap-up, and we'll do a couple more of these. Where was the question over here? Yeah.
Hi, Derek from Intech, Southwest Florida. We're in a kind of unique position where over the last year we've grown from one automation engineer to a team of 4 or 5 kind of proactive, wearing a lot of different hats. We're lucky enough to have that one automation engineer kind of leading the way, but we don't really have any of those ethics or the clean coding practices or anything really set in stone. So, what would your recommendation be on starting down that path early?
Well, I did write a book about 16 years ago, 17 years ago, that might help with that. The book has mostly things like Java in it, which might help you, might not. Although most of the ideas in the book would translate just to any language at all. So that's number one. Number two, though, is you've got 4 people. And those 4 people together are going to have good ideas. So it would be a very interesting thing for you to do, to have a Friday afternoon, every Friday afternoon, if you can pull it off, where you dedicate that afternoon to playing. Let's try this. Let's try that. Does this shape work better? Do those shapes work better? Let's try a few things. And you're going to throw it all away. By the end of Friday, you're going to throw it all away. But you have spent some time in a very low stakes environment trying crazy ideas. And that can help an enormous amount.
Okay. I think we have time for maybe one more. And I think we had there we go, Andrew. Can you grab that?
Hi, I'm Jim Barry, Behar Relentless Solutions. So as we evolve developers into citizen developers and people coming up with ideas, how do you feel about the vast amounts of data that come from these disparate systems and the intercollection of this data and shoveling data to the left and shoveling data to the right and making it fit? How do you see the citizen developer or the community development that needs to occur in an MSP evolving so that people take a deeper stance and understanding the data that will drive these automations?
So there's a thing that happens as systems get more complicated. And that is that at some point, you take a step back and you look at all the data sources you've got and you realize you're going to have to consolidate them. You're going to have to create yet another data source that serves this purpose. You're going to draw from the ones that you had been using, concentrate it in another, and then build your systems around that. And that is an endlessly repeating process that never stops happening. So, and the reason that you have to do that is that if you don't do that, the number of processes out here and the number of incoming lines, the number of dependencies on those disparate data sources grows to the point of unmanageability. There is a limit. And at some point, you can't pass that limit. If you have 1,000 programs that are touching a particular database, getting anybody to make a schema change in that database is going to be hell. Right? So eventually, you just back off and say, okay, I can't deal with that. We're going to suck data from here and suck data from there, put it there, and we'll use this. And then that will repeat over and over again, which makes me challenge the idea of the citizen automator. Right? Not that that's impossible, but there has to be something behind that that organizes the structure so that those people who are less experienced don't ruin everything within 2 years. So somebody's got to be behind their architecting that.
Okay. Before we let you go, the room wants to tap your brain forever. How can they tap your brain forever? Is there a particular spot for those who aren't familiar with your work where they're continually learning from you?
Forever is a long time.
Yeah.
So you can go to my website. It's cleancoder.com. It's pretty easy to find me there. Or you can listen to me on Twitter, Uncle Bob Martin on Twitter. And I've got a whole bunch of videos that over the last 15 years that I've put online, and that's at cleancoders.com. So cleancoder.com is me, videos are cleancoders.com. And tons of videos, like 60 or 70 hours of video up there.
Fantastic. Well, how about one more round of applause?
Thank you. Appreciate that.